For a custom fit with your crochet garments, you can use short rows. For example, you can add volume to the body of a skirt while having a more cinched waistband as exampled here. Or you can add extra fabric in the bust area or hips, any part of the body that you want to add more curvature as shown here. This swatch you can also use for a skirt. This particular swatch I was testing for a narrowed sleeve on a sweater. So let me show you how to do short rows with a single crochet. I already have my swatch started here. So in this section I'm doing back loop single crochets to imitate a waistband, for example. So let me just power through these real quick. Okay. Alright, I finished this section of the back loop single crochets, and I have a stitch marker here to indicate where I'm beginning and ending the short rows, because once you begin that process, it can be really hard to see where that final stitch is, and it's easy to add extra stitches or lose a stitch, so I would highly recommend that you have a stitch marker handy. So I'm going to take that out for now, because we actually don't need to start, and I'm just doing regular single crochets now, because we actually don't need to start the short row until we get back to the bottom and come back up. But I'm going to put my stitch marker back in this stitch, so I know exactly which one it is. I'm going to go ahead and complete my row of single crochets, and then I'm going to come back up part way, just back up to here, because you don't need to watch me do all that. And then I'll show you what we do at the stitch marker. I actually made my swatch way too big, so let's pretend that this is the end of the row and that I went all the way down, because I really don't need all that extra. So yeah, there's the end. We went back up, and now we're at the stitch marker. You can go ahead and take that out. We're going to need it though in a second, so don't lose it. So when you get to that stitch marker, instead of doing a single crochet, you're going to do a slip stitch, because that hides the end of your short row very nicely. It keeps it from getting too bulky. So after you do that slip stitch, chain one, turn your work, and then into that same slip stitch, do another slip stitch, and then put your stitch marker back into that slip stitch so it doesn't get lost. And then single crochet all the way back down to the end of your piece. And then once you get to the end, turn your work, single crochet all the way back until you reach the stitch before the stitch marker, and then I'll show you what to do from there. Alright, I'm one stitch before the stitch marker, single crochet into this slip stitch, and then put your stitch marker back into that stitch, and then here is where we did our back loop single crochets, so you just resume with that. Do your back loop single crochets all the way back up and then all the way back down until you reach the stitch marker, and then you're just going to repeat that same process as many times as you want. For double crochet, once again, I would highly recommend that you utilize stitch markers, especially if you're going to be repeating your short rows, because otherwise it gets crooked and it's just hard to tell where they are. So I've got my stitch markers here. So I'm going to go ahead and do double crochets until I reach this second stitch marker. I'm going to make sure to replace this stitch marker in the stitch that matches. So do your double crochets all the way until you reach your second stitch marker, and then I'll show you what to do from there. Okay, I have reached that second crochet marker. I made sure to replace this first one because I'm going to need that here in just a minute. So remove your stitch marker, and then in this stitch, instead of a double crochet, do a single crochet. Because just like with when we were working in single crochet and we did a slip stitch, it'll help avoid bulk here and disguise where you did your short rows. And then turn your work, do another single crochet right on top of that last single crochet, and then put your stitch marker back so it doesn't get lost. And then you're going to resume your double crochets all the way back until you reach your next stitch marker, where we're going to do the exact same thing we did just right here. Alright, I've reached my stitch marker here. Let me show you once again what to do. So remove your stitch marker, and then in that stitch, do a single crochet, turn your work, and do a single crochet on top of it. Make sure to replace your stitch marker so that that single crochet doesn't get lost. And then double crochet all the way back until you reach the stitch marker, and I'll show you what to do from there. Alright, I've reached my stitch marker here, so you can remove that. And then double crochet into this stitch, And then for this next stitch, I like to hook it into this section to really help avoid puckering and hide that bulk. So instead of yarning over like you would with a regular double crochet, find a center piece here and put your hook through it, and then pull up a loop, and then continue with your double crochet here. So pull up your loop and draw through 2, and then draw through 2. So you can see how it really hides that gap and brings everything together here. And don't forget to put your stitch marker back into that stitch so that if you need to add more short rows here, you can do it in the exact same spot and it won't get lost. So go ahead and continue your double crochets until you get to the end of your row, and then you can turn your work, do your double crochets all the way back. Make sure you put this stitch marker back in its corresponding stitch, and then do your double crochets until you reach this stitch marker, where you're going to repeat exactly what we did here. But I'll get to this point and I'll show it to you one more time. Alright, I've once again reached my other stitch marker here, so I'm going to remove that, do a double crochet into that stitch, and I'm going to make sure to put my stitch marker back into that stitch so I can remember where it is for later. And then again, instead of doing a normal double crochet where you yarn over, put your hook through a loop here, and then draw up your yarn and resume your double crochet. And then you continue on with your row. And you can repeat that as many times as you need to get the effect that you want. You can see how it creates a nice space here for a larger bust, or if you have curvy hips, enabling you to have a nice custom fit on your crochet garments. This swatch I completed a while ago, but it's the exact same process as you do for the single crochet piece, but instead of going all the way back to the end of the row every time, you can go back up and create these shorter pieces, and it gives you this different shape. Hopefully you can see it. I know it's really tight. This is slip stitches in the back loops. This is an example I was testing for a sweater sleeve to try to have it taper towards the end, because typically you would do horizontal rows and then add decreases for every row until you got to the wrist, but I didn't really like the way that looked, so I wanted to imitate a knit stitch and have a tapered sleeve, which I don't have a pattern for that sweater yet, but I'm hoping to soon. Let me know in the comments if there's any other applications for these short rows that you can think of. I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. Happy crocheting!